How is everybody doing? We are picking it up in the Gospel of Luke. We are so close to being done. Today we are talking about chapter 22. Tomorrow I'm going to make a video on chapters 23 and 24 together to finish it out. But we are coming down to the home stretch. This is the final chance for the original hearers of Jesus to make their decision about him. He has spent 21 chapters leading up to this, clearly revealing that he is the true king of Israel and the true king over all creation that God promised all those years ago. And now it's time for them to make their decision. Are they going to submit to him, or are they going to rebel against him? Are they going to crown him as their king, or are they going to crucify him as their enemy? And the problem that we run into in Luke chapter 22 is that so many people choose to crucify him, not to crown him, to reject him, not embrace him. And what we see here in Luke 22 is that the single greatest obstacle to embracing King Jesus and his kingdom is our worldly mindset, our worldly obsession with worldly pursuits, our worldly obsession with security, our worldly obsession with power, our worldly obsession with status, our worldly obsession with maintaining our positions, with maintaining our safety, with accomplishing our worldly goals and dreams and wishes and plans. We see that in a long list of ways. More than anything, we see it with the Sanhedrin. Jesus tells the Sanhedrin, he tells them, you are not going to believe me no matter what I say to you. He says, you're not going to believe me no matter what kind of signs I show you. You're not going to believe me no matter what I do, no matter what miracles I perform, no matter what scriptures I fulfill. Nothing is going to make you believe me. Why will nothing make the Sanhedrin believe him, embrace him, follow him, submit to him as king, crown him? It's because he is not the kind of king that they are looking for. We haven't talked about this very much throughout the Gospel of Luke, but we talked about this a lot in Matthew because he really heavily leans into it. And we talked about it a little bit in Mark. But in the first century in Israel, the religious leaders in Israel and so many of the first century Israelites, they wanted the Messiah to be a revolutionary. They wanted him to be an insurrectionist. They wanted him to be essentially a terrorist. First century Israel was a hotbed for terrorist activities. There were so many terrorist groups like the Zealots and the Sicarii and so many others like that. The average first century Israelite essentially had a terrorist mindset, kind of like somebody in Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Hamas today, kind of like somebody in the IRA or something along those lines. The average first century Israelite had kind of a Taliban mindset. They were a captive nation. They were an occupied nation. They were captive to the Roman Empire. Rome had conquered most of the known world and essentially enslaved almost every other nation, every other kingdom, every other people group. Almost everyone was a slave to Rome, a serf to Rome. And so they had the boot of Rome on their necks. And that was true of Israel as well. And so the average Israelite fantasized about overthrowing the Roman government. The average Israelite fantasized about the Messiah coming as a kind of conquering, revolutionary, insurrectionist, terrorist king who would raise up an army of Israelites, overthrow the Roman Empire, and then Israel would be free. But they didn't just want freedom. They very specifically wanted the Messiah to overthrow Rome and then take over Rome's territory. They wanted to turn the empire of Rome into the empire of Israel. And so they wanted the Messiah to be a conquering revolutionary king who overthrew Rome and then took over Rome. They basically wanted Israel to become the new master nation that had their boots on the necks of everybody else. They wanted all the other nations of the earth to be slaves to Israel, just like before they had been slaves to Rome. That is what so many in the Sanhedrin wanted from the Messiah. Here's the problem. Jesus rejected that desire. He rejected worldly conquest. He rejected worldly power. Instead, he was a servant king. He gathered up the lost and the hurting and the broken and the struggling. He was a king for them. The Sanhedrin and the first century Israelites thought God loved the Jews and hated the Gentiles. They wanted God to empower the Jews and enslave the Gentiles, just like once upon a time, the Israelites had been slaves to the Gentile nation of Egypt. But Jesus rejected that. He was a king for the Gentiles just as much as he was a king for the Israelites. He was gathering the Gentiles and the foreigners into the nation and the covenant and the kingdom of Israel. So there'd be one kingdom with Jew and Gentile, slave and free, male and female, Greek and barbarian, and so on and so forth, like Paul talks about in Genesis or in Galatians 3:28. And so Jesus was not the kind of king that the Sanhedrin wanted. And because that is true, there was nothing he could do, nothing he could say that could get them to believe him. Their worldly desire for power, their worldly desire for an empire, their worldly desire for a revolution prevented them from embracing King Jesus when he came. Interestingly enough, that same thing is true for Judas. Why did Judas betray Jesus? I think his name actually gives us a hint. The name Judas would have been named after Judas Maccabeus from the Maccabean revolt several hundred years earlier. It was when the Jewish people were led by a man named Judas Maccabeus to revolt, have a revolution, an insurrection against a different government that was ruling over them. People idolized Judas Maccabeus and they fantasized about another revolt, another revolution like that. And so if you were a revolutionary, if you were an insurrectionist, if you had that kind of Taliban mindset, that IRA mindset, often you would name your child Judas. Judas's parents named him Judas. That tells us that they were probably eager for the revolution. And they probably taught Judas to be eager for the revolution. And at a certain point, Judas pieced together that the revolution is not coming, at least not with Jesus. That Jesus rejects that revolutionary, insurrectionist, Taliban mindset. And because that is true, he lost his, I guess you could say, he lost his confidence in Jesus. And so he went and he turned Jesus in to that Sanhedrin. And so Judas literally betrays Jesus, most likely because Jesus refused to be a revolutionary king like Judas wanted. Interestingly enough, that same thing is probably true for Peter. After Jesus is arrested, Peter denies ever having been his follower. Now, part of that, I'm sure, is that he's scared, right? This is self-preservation. This is the worldly mindset that says, I've got to protect myself. I've got to preserve myself. I've got to stay safe no matter what, even if it means doing things that are dishonorable or destructive or unfaithful. Part of it, I'm sure, is that, but at the same time, I'm sure that it was helped by the fact that as a first century Israelite, Peter would have also dreamed of the revolution, of the insurrection. Peter would have started following Jesus in the hopes that Jesus is going to be a conquering, revolutionary, insurrectionist king who will overthrow Rome. And as it becomes clearer and clearer that Jesus is not going to do that, Peter would have become increasingly disillusioned. And finally, Jesus pushes it over the edge by, rather than fighting back against the Romans when they arrest him, instead allowing himself to be arrested and taken away. That must have been the most devastating moment of Peter's life. It rattles him so deeply that for a time, he literally turns away from following Jesus. He denies that he's ever even met him. This is the worldly mindset of revolution, insurrection, extremism. At exactly the same time, we see the disciples, all 12 of them, not just Judas, not just Peter, all 12 of them are caught up in this worldly mindset that draws them away from the truth of God's kingdom. We see them arguing over who's the greatest, arguing over greatness, arguing over who's the top dog, who's the most important disciple, who's the highest on the totem pole. And Jesus says, you guys need to shut up, knock it off. You are thinking in a worldly way. You're thinking like pagans. You are thinking like the rulers of this fallen and broken world. And we see that even more deeply when the crowd comes to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and immediately the disciples pull out their swords and they just start chopping people's ears off. Man, that's a very specific thing to go for, but that's what they do. They start chopping people's ears off. They're trying to use violence to stop the arrest of Jesus. And once again, we know they are first century Jews who are eager for the revolution, and that means that very likely in their heads, their thought process is, this is it. This is the beginning. The revolution has begun. This is the moment when Jesus is going to start using his Messiah power to fight back against Rome. So they try to use violence to fight back against the people trying to arrest him. But Jesus says, stop. He says, you guys are acting out of a pagan mindset. You're acting out of a worldly mindset. You're acting out of a mindset that is in line with this fallen and broken world. You are acting with the mindset of the serpent king, who is obsessed with what? Power. Our obsession with power is an echo of the serpent king's obsession with power. He says, you are acting out of a pagan mindset, out of the serpent mindset. And so Jesus heals his attackers. He puts their ears back on for them. He says the kingdom mindset is a mindset that says, whether I gain power or not, I am going to live in a way that reflects God's goodness and God's glory. Whether I achieve status or prestige or wealth or power or not, I am going to live to serve. He says that the mindset of God's kingdom is the mindset of a servant. He says God's kingdom is about serving, and God's kingdom is about blessing. It's about serving even the people who are wronging you and attacking you. That is God's heart, and that is the heart of God's kingdom, and that is the way that he has created us and called us to live as his kingdom people. And so he heals his attackers. And he says the rulers of this fallen and broken world, the human rulers here in the serpent's kingdom, they lord it over each other. They exert, they push their power on others. They dominate each other. But that is not the way it will be with you as my kingdom people. Instead, you are going to live to serve and to bless even those who curse you. He gathers them together for one final lesson before he's arrested and goes off to the cross. He gathers them together at Passover time. So we're about to celebrate Easter. It is getting into the part of the story where the first Easter happens. Easter happens during the Passover festival. Easter is literally just the Western word that we use to describe the Christian celebration of the resurrection of Jesus at Passover. In the Eastern church traditions like Eastern Orthodoxy and stuff like that, they actually refer to Easter as Paschal. Paschal comes from Passover. Literally, when we celebrate Easter, we are celebrating Passover, not in the way the ancient Israelites celebrated it. You do not need to do a Passover Seder. I mean, do whatever you want. It's not a big deal. But we are celebrating the fulfillment of Passover in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. We are going to get to that in just a second, but he gathers them together for the Passover festival in the upper room of someone's home, in the guest room of someone's home, to teach them one last vitally important thing. He's teaching them about the way that he is about to redeem and restore them, the way that he is about to restore our world, the way that he is about to put everything right again. You see, at Passover looked back at the Exodus. The first ever Passover happened during the Exodus. In the Exodus, God rescued the Israelites from slavery to Egypt, slavery to Pharaoh. Now, here's the thing. Pharaoh was a serpent king. Literally, Pharaoh's outfit as the king of Egypt was made to look like a serpent. Why does that matter? It matters because Pharaoh was a kind of foreshadowing. Pharaoh was a kind of type. Pharaoh was a kind of metaphor. I mean, he was a real human. The Exodus story really happened, but in himself, he is a kind of human metaphor for the devil. Pharaoh was kind of like a little mini devil. He was kind of like a human reflection, a shadow of the devil. Pharaoh was a serpent king, and he was kind of an echo, a reflection of the serpent king, the devil. And so the Israelites were captive to the serpent king Pharaoh in the same way that all of humanity is captive to the serpent king Satan. And in the Exodus, God rescued the Israelites from the serpent king Pharaoh, and he crushed the serpent king Pharaoh, and he laid waste to the serpent king Pharaoh's serpent kingdom, Egypt. He rescues the Israelites, he crushes the serpent king, and he destroys the serpent kingdom. In the same way, in the future, Passover looks forward to the end of all things, when the true King Yahweh, King Jesus, will crush the true serpent king, Satan, will lay waste to the serpent kingdom, our fallen and broken world in rebellion against God, and will redeem, rescue all of humanity through the cross. Passover looked back at the first Exodus, and it looked forward to the second Exodus. And as Jesus is gathered to celebrate the Passover with his disciples in that upper room, he says, I am about to die and then rise again. They didn't understand that part, but they will. And by dying and rising again, I'm going to fulfill the promise of Passover. He says, I have long desired to eat this bread and drink this wine with you. I'm not going to partake of this again until I eat it in my kingdom that is coming, until it is fulfilled in my kingdom that is coming. What is he talking about? Here's what he's talking about. In the Old Testament, if you want to look this up, it's Isaiah 25, and there's a handful of other places, but the prophets looked forward to the coming kingdom of God, the fullness of God's kingdom, when Jesus takes the throne of this world back for himself from the serpent king, when he unbreaks the world, undoes the fall, puts everything right again, redeems humanity, and restores the world. The metaphor they used to describe that was the metaphor of a great banquet, specifically a great wedding banquet. We would sit at the table of God. We would eat God's bread. We would drink God's wine. We would be guests at God's table, gathered in his family, gathered in his household, gathered in his kingdom, gathered in his covenant in a world that has been renewed and restored as people who have been renewed and restored. The metaphor that the Old Testament used to describe that was a great banquet. He's saying, I am going to die and rise again, and me dying and rising again is going to cause that great banquet to come. It is going to cause my kingdom to come in its fullness in the end. So right now, I am eating my last meal. And yet, that's not a bad thing, because when I die and when I rise, it is going to bring God's rule and reign into this fallen and broken world. It is going to seal the deal, and I will take the throne of this world back from the serpent king. How? He actually tells us exactly how. He says, he takes the bread, he says, this is my body, it's going to be given for you, it's going to be broken for you. My body will be broken. And he says, this wine, this is my blood, it's going to be spilled for you, it's going to be shed for you, it's going to be poured out for you, and it's going to be the blood of the new covenant. What is the new covenant in the Old Testament? The prophets said that a day was coming when the Lord would forgive all of our sin, would heal us of our sinful nature, literally remove our sinful nature from us, would be our God, and we would be his people. I'm mostly quoting from the book of Jeremiah. He says, we will be his people and he will be our God. The wall between us and God will be broken down, and he will place his spirit within us. We will have the Holy Spirit not only with us, but dwelling within us. He says that new covenant is going to be brought through my body being broken and my blood being shed, spilled, poured out for you. When I go to the cross, all of your sin is going to be forgiven. Your sin will be laid on me, and I will take it far away from you. Your sin will be wiped away. It'll be blotted out. It'll be taken as far as the east is from the west. God will no longer treat you like you are sinners worthy of condemnation. He will treat you like you are faithful sons and daughters worthy of reward. I will be punished for your sin, and you will be rewarded for my righteousness, my obedience. That's what's happening in the cross. And because that is true, we are fully and freely and forever forgiven. God will never hold anything against you again. And because that is true, you are part of God's kingdom. Apart from the cross, you could not be part of God's kingdom. But because the cross has removed everything that keeps you from God and God from you, now you've been naturalized into God's kingdom. You're a citizen of God's kingdom. You've been adopted into God's family. You've been grafted into God's covenant. You are part of the people of God. But that is not all. Because he says, you don't just become part of God's kingdom. You begin to rule alongside Jesus in God's kingdom. He tells the disciples, I am going to bestow a kingdom upon you. He doesn't just say, I'm bringing you into the kingdom. He says, I'm bestowing you with the kingdom. He says, you are going to sit on thrones and judge the 12 tribes of Israel. Judging was literally part of the kingly rule of Jesus, the kingly work of Jesus. We are going to join in the kingly work of Jesus. He sends us out to do his kingdom work. When we do the kingdom work of Jesus, when we heal the sick, when we raise the dead, when we cast out demons, when we introduce people to the God who wants to redeem and restore them, we are joining in the kingly work of Jesus. We are exercising our calling to rule with Jesus. We are fulfilling our role as the images, the kingly images of Jesus, the kingly regents of Jesus. Remember, we talked about Genesis 1. He created us in his image. That means we are like statues that reflect the king. And that means that we are like his right-hand men, his left-hand men. We're his vice regents. We do his work. He rules not only over us, he rules through us. We are doing the kingly work of Jesus every time we carry out his mission. He's bestowed the kingdom onto us, and he's empowered us to do his kingly work. And all of this is possible only because of what is about to happen in chapters 23 and 24, because of the cross and resurrection. We're going to talk all about that tomorrow in chapters 23 and 24. But until then, that is Luke chapter 22. Let me know what questions you have. Put them in the comments in this YouTube video, or put them in the Facebook group that is devoted to this, and we will tackle every single one of them. Until then, I love you guys. Take care and keep reading.